the children's liturgy during Mass, when they take the kids out and then they all come back in with a picture of a donkey that they've coloured in. That. What the hell is that all about?
G'day everyone and welcome to the Thomas More Centre channel. My name is Mark Makowiecki and today it's my great pleasure to be interviewing Philippa Martyr. Philippa is a Perth-based historian, university lecturer and academic researcher, and she has recently published a book entitled Witness, the Future of the Catholic Church in Australia. Philippa, welcome to the channel.
Hello, Mark. Thank you very much. It's lovely to see you again. It's been a long time and you've had a lot of children since I last saw you, which was lovely to catch up with you earlier, you and Miriam. Good for you.
Thank you. I think it's almost a decade, isn't it, since we were caught up in Hobart?
Yep, long time.
So, Philippa, I was hoping you could start by introducing yourself a bit in terms of upbringing, professional life, interests, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. Talking about myself, not a problem, Mark, usually as a rule. Look, I was born in Perth and that's where I live now. And I was the youngest of 7 children. So, I like a big family when I see one. Both of my parents have died in the last couple of years, though, but the rest of us are still very much alive and kicking. I've got 23 nieces and nephews. I went to a very expensive Catholic school, which was rather wonderful. Didn't form me in the faith, but was certainly very good for the education. And I went from there to university and I just stayed there. I'm afraid I'm one of those people who became an eternal student. So I liked it so much I got a job at a university teaching in Tasmania. So I moved over there for the second half of the 90s, I think it was. And then at the end of that, I decided to go to the UK and do some postdoctoral work. And when I was in the UK, I discerned a vocation to religious life, which I did not expect. So I did that for 5.5 years. And probably the best thing to say about that at this point is that discernment is a two-way street. And, so anyway, I didn't make final vows and I left the community and I came back to Perth. And I got a job at the local psychiatric hospital, which everybody thought was incredibly funny. But it wasn't actually. It was a brilliant job. It was in the clinical research centre there. And it used all my academic skills and I had a lot of fun and I learned heaps. And I did that for about 10 years. And at the end of that, the writing was kind of appearing on the wall. And I thought, I'm going to take a voluntary redundancy if I can before I get the sack. And then I had a stroke, which no one expected, least of all me. And clearly I survived, but it was a real wake-up call. So I left the job, I took the redundancy, and I went back to university teaching just part-time because I thought that was all I could handle. And I've been doing that since 2017. And 2018, I thought, because I'm an eternal student, I went and got myself the equivalent of a psychology degree, an honours level psychology degree, which was great fun. And I learned how to do data analysis much better than I'd ever known before in my life. And so that's given my whole academic life a whole nother dimension. But it also gave my Catholic life a whole nother dimension because I met Stephen Bullivant, who's a UK-based researcher who counts Catholics and he does data analysis and does surveys and he's trying to map Catholics sort of as they live and breathe and move, particularly church-going ones. And so he and I have sort of really hit it off and we've been doing some research together since then. So just personally, I grew up in the church in Australia when it was really confused. So it was like the 70s and 80s. There was a huge amount of confusion and that really did form me. So I'm one of those people who is actually a bit shell-shocked still by what the church was like in those days. And it's different now from what it was. I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm saying it's different. You've got different crosses to carry and rows to hoe in the church in Australia now. But I'm so encouraged to meet younger Catholics like yourself and like other young families particularly, because it's like the church has a future. When there are young families investing in their children and in church going and in God and informing them as good Catholics, I think the church really has a future in Australia. So that's a little bit like what the book is about. The book has very much come out of not just my academic experience, but I think also my personal experience as well.
Having read your book, you're quite a plain speaker. And I was wondering, have you found that there are benefits as well as costs when it comes to plain speaking?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the greatest benefit is that people trust me and that people tell me stuff. And when people tell me stuff, that's the genesis of research ideas. Because, when people come and complain to me about things, even just the questions that you ran by me for this interview, there was stuff in there I kept thinking, I could do a project on that, because actually there's something you could really research there. Knowing that I've got kind of ecclesiastical street cred because I have put myself out there so much, and I have stuck my neck out so many times in public, and I'm on the public record as saying all sorts of things about the Catholic Church, many of which are not very flattering. People feel that they can actually tell me stuff, and I love that, and I really welcome it, because that's how I learn all the time about what the church is like.
I imagine that would be more the case on the laity side rather than the clergy side. Is that the case? Have you encountered difficulties with clergy?
No. Mostly the priests who contact me, it's like, rah, do it more, and that's wonderful, because I have a real heart for the priests, for our priests, and I want them to thrive. I want them to be happy, and I want them to help us become holy. And they can't do that if they don't have our prayers and our support and, feeling like someone's in their corner. So oddly enough, priests have told me stuff as well, which has been fascinating, really, really helpful and useful, and helped me to understand some of the challenges of their ministry too, because it's really easy to diss priests from the outside, from the pews. It's very easy to criticize them, but to understand what's going on behind the scenes, that's really helpful as well. Not so many bishops, I have to say, but a few. There's a very small handful of bishops who I think, take what I say seriously, which is nice, and they're even Australian bishops, which is even nicer. But yeah, probably more laity, and definitely people who feel really marginalised. And that's that wonderfully fashionable word in the church these days. They do feel marginalised in their own church. They feel like strangers, aliens in their own church. And I think that's a terrible situation. So if I can help them, I will.
Yeah. It's certainly a welcome voice. I'm glad you're out there. So on the topic of the church in Australia, like I said, you've just published a book. I believe it was published last week, at least according to Amazon. Tell us.
Is it on Amazon? Excellent. It went to the printers last week. So the hard copies, you should be able to get your hands on one by probably first week of March. Available at all good Catholic bookstores. I'll just throw that in. If people do, it'll be available at Fidelity Books and Gifts, definitely in Melbourne for any of your Melbourne readers. And I will be there on the 22nd of March. If you would like your copy signed, I will actually be there. This is before the launch, which will be in Perth in April, but I'm actually coming over to Melbourne because the people at Fidelity have been long-time supporters of mine, and they're wonderful people. So I'm very happy to come over there, and we'll have an afternoon tea. If you want to come, you have to let the shop know, because we want to put on some sandwiches and so forth. But anyone who's watching this who's in Melbourne is very welcome to come along and meet me there. So yeah, that's where the book will be. What do you want to know about it?
Yeah, so I was wondering what motivated you to write it. Obviously, there's been some thought go into it. So
yeah,
culminated in this.
I usually tell people blind rage. I just suddenly snapped one day, but that's not true. I've been chewing over it for years and over these things for years, but I never had time to write a book, and I didn't really have the motivation or really the data. I had a lot of anecdote, but doing the Catholics in Australia survey in 2022 with Stephen Bullivan was fantastic, because suddenly we had data about a really important group of Catholics, the ones who are still going to Mass, because no one talks to them or about them. We're really good at talking about the people who don't go to Mass anymore, but we're neglecting this group of people who do go to Mass, and they are actually the future of the church in Australia. So we need to know more about them. So it sort of all came together in probably March last year. It kind of gelled. It's like when you're making custard. I don't know if you've ever made custard from eggs, Mark. You probably haven't, but you stand by the stove and you're just stirring and stirring and stirring, and you think this is never going to turn into custard. And then quite suddenly it does. Suddenly you've got this thick, delicious thing. And that's what happened with me. So I just sat down and started writing effectively, and kept writing on Mondays and Thursdays and weekends, because that was the only time I had. And it was finished in 9 months. So, some of it, though, I had thrashed out already in the Catholic Weekly. So it was like, yes, I've thought about this and I know what I want to say, and I'm going to say it. And I did. So, yeah, that's kind of how it came together.
Okay. And early on, you mention, you quote an Australian priest who suggests that there seem to be two different churches kind of existing side by side at present. One being the authentic parochial diocesan church, as you put it, and the other a false, is it carapace? How do you
Yes,
pronounce it?
like the book, a carapace, a sclerotic carapace. In fact, is I think exactly what I call it. Somebody had to ask me what that meant. But the sclerotic is like when your arteries harden,
Okay.
so it's like this hardened, clogged up, and it's like a terrible exoskeleton. A carapace is like a turtle shell or what's on the outside of a lobster. It's just kind of this thing that's grown on the authentic church. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And it's also been described as the Borg and Catholic
Yes.
kink by others. So yeah,
Yes.
the question would be: is do you see any connection between this dichotomy between the parochial diocesan church and the carapace, and Fulton Sheen's idea that he proposed that there was an anti-church that would try and supplant the true church? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, he's not the only one. And when you go right through the history of the church, there's people who've warned about this. I mean, I think mystics and saints and really quite ordinary, a lot of very ordinary Catholics have always been aware that when you're a Catholic, you're always living inside the book of Revelation. In every age, it's just you look at the protagonists in the book of Revelation, you see the main players, and you see them in every age. It's just sometimes their costumes change a little bit, and so I think this is just, it's the same old, same old. I have a friend who's a theologian, and don't hold that against her. She teaches at Notre Dame, and don't hold that against her either. She's a wonderful person, Francesca Murphy. She wrote a really good essay, I think it was in about 2019, called Liturgy and Slaughter in the book of Revelation. And in it, she talks about this, that in every age, it's the lamb who was slain versus the beast. Every age. And just, so I'm not in a hurry to say that what we've got now is the Antichrist, or whatever. But we all live with this in every age that we're living in. There's always going to be attempts to corrupt the church, attempts to generate a false church, to take people away from the authentic thing. And, it's what you have to be aware of as a Catholic, I think. So without getting too apocalyptic and swivel-eyed, I would agree with you. Yes, I think Fulton Sheen would be right about that. And I think if he were alive now, he'd probably say, something quite similar if he was looking at the church. It's just one of many problems. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it's going back to the wheat and the tares as well. As they coexist, like they might seem to be indistinguishable, but they will be separated in time. But yeah, you do have this
Yes.
dual thing going on.
Yeah, and that's actually what that priest says at the beginning of the book. That was exactly what he said. Each considers what itself to be the wheat and the other to be the darnel, and that's so true. The carapace thinks it's the real church. It thinks it's the important bit of the church, and I don't happen to agree with that.
Yeah, me neither. So you write for the Catholic Herald, but
Catholic
you point
Weekly.
out the Catholic Weekly. I'm sorry, the Catholic Weekly. The Herald
Catholic
is
Herald's
a British
UK,
publication. The Catholic Weekly in Sydney. But you do point out that diocesan newspapers tend to paint a fundamentally dishonest picture of the church by portraying everything as rosy. Maybe the Weekly is different.
I think the Weekly is different. Sorry.
I think that's why people still read it. Yeah.
I think so too. Yes.
But in general, why do you think that these diocesan newspapers are being maintained when they don't really deliver the news?
Well, the thing is, it's not really the newspapers. There's very few of them left. It's really more, what I criticise in the book more is the strategic communications directorates or offices or whatever, because that it's so Orwellian, because actually their job is to make sure people don't find stuff out, I think, and it's very much about shaping a very, very specific narrative that doesn't include a whole lot of painful and difficult stuff. So with the newspapers, I mean, I've had Catholic journalists say to me, 5 years and they'll all be gone. In Australia, there won't be a print version of them anymore. Most of them have gone online because it's just so much cheaper than running stuff in print. Why do we have Catholic journalism is a bigger and more complicated question. I think it has a role. I think it has an important role, but it's got to be allowed to be free and honest in what it discloses. And this is where I think the US journal, The Pillar, is outstanding, because they will investigate stuff and they will give you what they've found, and they actually make an effort to present both sides of the story, which is also amazing. And people, I read the comments section because it's brilliant, and there's people cancelling subscriptions and there's people increasing their subscriptions, because this is what the church is like. People are very polarised, but at least the Pillar's trying to present both sides, and that, I think, would be lovely to see more Catholic journalism like that. I'm not sure it could survive in Australia. It would take someone to set up something like the Pillar and run it and fund it, and it would have to be independent of the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, and that, I think, is where things would come unstuck. So yeah, I mean, they keep going because I think they're a hangover from when it was important to have a diocesan newspaper. I don't like the fact that they're morphing into diocesan strategic communications, because I think that is definitely a step in the wrong direction.
Yeah. So also, Philippa, you mentioned the importance of tithing, but you point out that much of our tax money flows to church agencies, and so it could be said that we involuntary tithe. And another reason people might not be tithing is because they're protesting against drab churches and mediocre liturgies. And that betrays a lack of investment of the money that's already been given, perhaps. So what do you say to this kind of financial protest?
Yeah, that's a good one. And this is the one that really got me fired up about a research project, because, I mean, tithing isn't really a big Catholic thing in my experience. It's more like Mormons do that and so forth. I don't know any Catholics who tithe. Personally, you may do it. I don't know. But certainly putting money in the collection, that is such an interesting question, and I think there have been changes there, particularly since COVID. But that's my gut instinct, because you can't get data on this stuff, Mark, as you can imagine, unless you actually go to a church and it's the parish council is reporting on the finances, and it's like, folks, we're down 25%, we need to do something about it. So because I actually don't know the answer to that question, I would suggest a research project, because I know people have very different reasons for putting money in the collection and the amount they put in. I know people who have stopped putting money in the collection on Sundays because they have seen evidence that that parish is wasting money on ridiculous things, and they are very angry about that. So it's like, well, if you've got money to waste, you don't need my money. I need my money. I'll give it to someone else. I'll give it to a charity rather than give it to you. And look, I know we're duty bound to maintain our parishes. It's one of our obligations as Catholics, but there are other ways of doing that. Like if you work in kind or something like that, you do the gardening or whatever. So I would actually like to talk to Catholics about this. How do you see? What does it mean to you when you put money in the collection? How much do you put in? Have you changed the amount that you put in over time? Why? Why not? I think that would be a brilliant research project, and you could do it with an online survey. You could ask people all over Australia. So you'll notice that my book is full of research projects I think people should do. and it is. And in fact, one of the first appendix is a list of the research projects I think people should do. And I would add that to that list.
Mm-hmm. Another point you make is that there's been a marked drop in people's belief in purgatory, even among mass-going Catholics. And so I was wondering what factors you think might attribute to this.
Yeah, and that's a really scary one, and I was particularly astonished to find that old people don't believe in purgatory like they used to, because you would think they would be the people most interested in purgatory, because I know I'm very interested in purgatory just from purely selfish reasons, in that I actually hope I shouldn't aspire to it. I should aspire to heaven, I know, but I find it a very comforting doctrine. Yeah. Foot in the door is enough for me. I think, look, in the book I talk about the leaching out, the washing out of belief in the supernatural in the Catholic Church in Australia. And this is a phenomenon that Larry Chapp, the US theologian and, sort of gangbuster writer.
And previous guest on this show, I might add. So I'll link to his video at the end of this.
Oh, Larry's amazing. I hope one day to be allowed to talk to him, because I think, it'd be really great. We've emailed a lot, and I've been on his blog and things like that. Larry Chapp is very big on this non-belief, this diminution of belief in the supernatural within our religion. So we're all trotting off to Mass on Sundays, and we're all saying the words, but in our heart of hearts, we don't really believe it. And he believes that there are priests and bishops affected by this. And of course, that's going to affect your belief in something like purgatory. So if you have the idea that everyone's going straight to heaven, why would you bother? So there's no incentive there. Look, to be honest, I think also parents have a lot to answer for here, because they're not teaching their kids about it, because, no one wants, that granny's not in heaven yet, No parent wants that. I get it. But you've got to be tougher. You've got to toughen up a bit and teach your kids the hard stuff. And it's not like children don't believe in the supernatural because, like I said in the book, I went to that All Saints Day Mass and every kid there had been trick-or-treating the night before. So they believe in, dead stuff and boogie. They're happy to believe in all of that. There's no reason why they can't be taught about purgatory as an actual doctrine, except that their parents are too embarrassed because they don't really believe in it either.
It would be good to examine what the Poles are doing, because with their All Souls Day, in the evening they go to the cemetery and the candle makers make a killing, because all these beautiful red and amber and whatnot colored things that illuminate the entire cemetery. So culturally, they'd have to be very strong on that. But yeah, you're right. I was a funeral director, or an assistant funeral director, for a year, and going to a year of funerals. And
wow, yeah.
Culturally, we're far beyond Catholic, but even the Catholic funerals were
yes,
canonization ceremonies, right?
yes,
And
yes.
And yes,
God should be thanking his lucky stars that the deceased is in heaven with him now. I think that's actually what I say, because that is the impression you get from these funerals. There's no sense of having to pray for these people's souls. And yet, the day after that dreadful school mass, I went to the All Souls Day Mass, totally different vibe. And it was lovely. And we all went round to the columbarium because various people have relatives buried there. And we all prayed, and Father put the holy water everywhere, and there was incense, and it was solemn and quiet and reverent and really lovely. And I thought, good.
yeah.
But the young people weren't at that mass. They were all at the school mass the day before, which was horrible. So, yeah, got to do a bit of work there, I think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's great to see when it's brought back. I mean, Mary, my wife, she's bringing all these practices back, and we've got a Catholic church just up the road from us, about a 4-minute walk, with a cemetery. And so on All Souls, we'll go up there and we'll say prayers for the dead and all those kind of things. And
excellent.
It's really, it really enriches it. It's like a thick Catholicism.
Yes.
And the recovery of those kind of things is, I think, what's going to help restore our Catholic identity.
Yes, and the deceased in your own family. Teach the children to pray for deceased grandparents and relatives, and if a neighbour dies, they get added to the list. You can end up having a whole family of the Holy Souls, and believe me, they will not be ungrateful, when the time comes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And kids, most kids I've found love funerals. They find them fascinating because it's so weird. Everything is so strange, and they love the graveyard.
Yeah. Well, I think, if I can recall, death wasn't something that I feared as a child. It was just this kind of phenomenon. And it's only as we grow older and we become, I think, aware of our own sinfulness, perhaps, that we start to connect the dots and perhaps go into a kind of denial. But there we go. So turning to perhaps a lighter subject, I'm not sure. For some people, it's concerning. But to the subject of single Catholics, you mentioned that some people have become convinced that there's a particular person that God wants them to marry, and that they can tie themselves in knots, thinking they've missed them or lost them or rejected a future spouse. Can you speak more to this problem?
Mark, I think hours, because it's so interesting to me. I've met them and talked to them, Catholics, like this young Catholics, and it breaks my heart. Because people tie themselves in knots. It's a bigger problem of tying yourself in knots about the will of God for me. And the will of God for you is so simple. The will of God for you is your salvation. That's it. The rest of it, it's right your own adventure. You have free will. And you need to get to know yourself well. That's part of maturing as a Catholic, is to get to know yourself and figuring out what state of life is most likely to get you to heaven. Because God is probably not going to put it on a billboard. He's going to get you to use your reason and your free will and your common sense, which I hope you do have. Most people do have some degree of common sense. And just, reflect on that. And this is where spiritual direction also is hugely helpful in getting to know who you are in the scheme of things. And that will usually show you quite clearly what state of life is probably going to get you to heaven. And look, I've been there. I've done it. I've tried religious life because I thought, this is where God is leading me. No problem. I'll go and try it. And I think if you do feel any prompting to religious life, that's the first thing you should do, is go and try it. Do not become a perpetual discerner, because you will drive everyone around you mad and probably drive yourself mad as well. Go and find a community and just go and live in with them for a week. Talk to them. If they'll let you. Go and give it a go. Get it out of your system. And for a lot of people, that's enough. They just get it out of their system and then they go and find a spouse. Other people, it's like, oh, actually, this kind of works. I think this might be where I'm meant to be, but maybe not here, maybe in another community. That kind of stuff. The worst thing is to be one of these perpetual discerners who drones on about their quest, to anyone who will listen and never actually does anything about it. So that's the main thing. I know what it's like to be tied in knots about what God's will is for you, because I didn't know for years, and it was the most wonderful relief to discover that he just wanted me to go to heaven. And so from that, I had to think, well, look, when have I been happiest in my life? When have I been happiest and closest to God? And when have I felt the most free and maybe the most feminine, if you like, the most faithful? When have I felt that way the most? And it was when I wasn't dating anyone. And there it was. And God had been dropping hints about that all my life. But of course, I knew better. So I had been ignoring all of those hints for a very, very long time until finally he caught up with me and I snapped and I thought, okay, I'll do it. And since then, it's been hugely rewarding and it has made me happy. The unmarried state absolutely suits me. And it's the state in which I can do the most for the church and I can do the most for God. I can do the most for other people. It's great. I think people have been told a lot of really unhelpful things about vocations and about religious life and about marriage and, you'll never be happy if you don't find your vocation. It's nonsense. People have gone into the priesthood and come out, gone into the seminary and come out, religious life and come out, and God has rewritten their life around that choice. And a lot of them are happy. Actually, I hate to disappoint any listeners who are hoping that these people would be unhappy for the rest of their life, but actually a lot of them are really happy because they're working with God. They love God and they want to get to heaven and God is helping them. The path has been very windy, but they are on the right path. And it's so, I've had people come to me and say, look, why won't God tell me what to do? I don't know what God wants me to do in this situation. It's like the fork in the road kind of situation. And I've been able to tell them, look, God is probably waiting for you to decide what to do. And when you make that choice, he's going to swing behind you and he's going to help you with the choice that you've made. And if it's the wrong choice, he'll guide you out of it gently in his own way, usually. And if it's the right choice, he will be there and you will go forward from there and you'll know what to do. So really, the idea is to get to heaven. And you can actually write your own adventure. God wants you to because that's why he gave us free will. Yeah. So yeah, this is a really thorny one, and it cuts across marriage and religious vocation and the priesthood as well. And there is a problem. There's a marriage drought. There's a lot of young people who are probably, a lot of them are frustrated because they can't find a spouse, but you really need to go back in front of the tabernacle and talk to God about who you are. And say, well, look, what in me is perhaps not ready? What are you trying to tell me by this drought in my life? If you want me to get married, what are you trying to tell me about being single right now? Is it that I need to deal with my mental health problems? Do I need to learn how to balance it, like my bank book and get out of debt? Do I need to learn how to cook? Do I need to stop using porn? That's a big one. So stopping a lot of young people getting married now in the church, and we're a little bit shy of talking about that. But anywho, and men and women, a priest told me, a very good priest who I trust, said that that's the sin he hears most in confession from men and women, young and old, is porn use. So, yeah, a lot to pray about, Mark.
Yeah.
Long answer. Answer to a short question, but a lot to pray about.
There's certainly particular challenges confronting this generation, I think, with and you're touching on some of those things, I think, which make the availability of people there's just not as many around as perhaps there used to be.
Yes, smaller families doesn't help.
Less spouses. Right. So it's compounding in a lot of ways. But yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, I was pursuing a priestly vocation when I was told to go and study for a year, and then everything kind of clicked into place. And then I found my wife a year later, and I've found that God tends to close doors in my face, and then that's where I get guided. If I'm going in the wrong direction, the door will close, and it's not like I've missed out on that opportunity. It's like, no, go over this way.
Yes. And that's a lot of young people miss that too. They see it as like, oh, God doesn't love me, but it's actually no. This is the point where you listen. What does the closed door mean?
Yeah. So just discerning and surrendering to that, and things tend to work out one way or another, and hopefully you land on your feet. So, all right, so on to Catholic schooling. So you mentioned a bit of your own schooling. I share those sentiments about having a decent education, but not particularly a good faith formation. You mentioned in the Catholics in Australia study, which was undertaken in 2022, I believe.
That's right.
It found that more, and you use the term Catholic origin, so you don't talk about Catholic schools because they're not really Catholic. They're Catholic origin schools.
Yes.
So, it found, the study found that the more Catholic origin schooling a participant had, the less they conformed with core Catholic beliefs and practices. And yet, the less Catholic origin schooling a participant had, the more they conformed to the Church's teaching on a wide range of issues and practices.
Yes.
So, Catholic schools are not only unproductive in terms of transmitting the faith, they're proving counterproductive, according to that reading.
Yeah.
So, what's to be done?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, this is a complex problem because the kids in Catholic schools are not Catholics themselves. And we know that. It's getting up to close to 50% now in some places, that the kids they're not even nominal Catholics in the schools. That's why Catholic origin, because they're just not. And for a whole range of other reasons, they're not what I would call Catholic schools. So there is that. It's also that the parents of the nominal Catholics that are in the schools, the kids, their parents are nominal Catholics only. So the overwhelming majority of kids in a typical Catholic school are not mass going. In fact, I did the numbers in the book and I worked out it's like a handful of kids, less than 10, maybe in each year level in a typical Catholic school who might actually be going to mass on a Sunday. And those kids are very lonely. So it's not kind of cause and effect with the schools. I think one thing I did point out is that there's a big difference between the under 40s and the over 40s here. The under 40s are actually much less likely to have been in a Catholic school at all, because we're talking about the generation that has been homeschooled, or they've been sent to state schools, or they've been sent to non-Catholic schools because their parents do not trust the Catholic education system. And that is something which has been so under-researched in Australia. And again, there's a research project on the list. So what's to be done? Look, years ago, I actually said at a Dawson Centre presentation in Tasmania, we need to sell off the Catholic education system. We need to sell it because actually it's largely secularised now. And think of the money. If we could sell it at market rates, wow, some of those schools are worth a mozza. So really, we should sell it before it's taken office. I don't think it's in danger of being taken office in the immediate future, in the way that perhaps individual healthcare providers might be a little bit more in danger, aka Calvary Hospital. But I think the point is going to have to come where we acknowledge that these schools are not Catholic, and we probably need to sever the connection between them and the parochial diocesan church. Because that way they can go their merry way. They can teach anything they like. They'll only be answerable to government for what they teach. Look, if they want to keep the building names, I suppose they can. They can get a school in the Catholic tradition, or whatever it is they want to call themselves. I'm not fussed, but I do think we need to cut that tie, because I think that is part of the carapace that's grown on the church. I think it's slowing us down, and it's only making it worse when you look at it, when you see the difference between what Catholic schools do and what the parochial diocesan church is supposed to be doing. They're on two different missions, really. They no longer are in lockstep. So I would sell it. I don't think lease it, because, like I say, I think that's going to prolong the agony. I would sell it to state governments if they could raise the money. And I did say in the book, people will think, that the mothership is coming, or that we're selling them, land with sinkholes or something like that. I don't care. The fact is that it has outlived its usefulness. The Catholic education system per se, it's not Catholic, and I think we could build a new one, but it would have to be in parallel to the old one. It's the Buckminster Fuller idea that you don't try and reconquer the thing that's falling apart. You build something new that makes the old model obsolete. And I think a smaller, authentically Catholic diocesan, even primary school level, single, 2, 3 primary schools would probably take the kids of the mass-going Catholics in some areas. That would probably be all you would need. And that might be enough. And you could do that with the money that you got from the sale of the Catholic origin schools. This is me, sitting at home in an armchair, having wild fantasies about what I do, but it's not that it's not that ridiculous. It's not that far-fetched. But it would be, what Yes Minister would call a very courageous, very courageous decision to be made.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've always thought, it's not only that you don't have enough Catholic students, you don't have enough Catholic staff. And so you need to have a drastic reduction. And perhaps you could stock, a school in north, south, east, and west and leave it to 4 schools with teachers available for students. But it's occurred to me, and I'm not sure if I'm being cynical, that one of the calculations in the minds of bishops is that a lot of their political clout comes from the fact that they run the education system. And if they were to sell it...
they do.
But if they were to sell it, that would be the big baseball bat gone. And you would have a potentially very wealthy church on the back of having sold everything. Not that that's a good thing either. But what do you think about that? That I think there's more to it than just we've got a good education system that teaches people to read well.
I actually don't think it's got clout at all. I think it's actually more like extending our neck and allowing the state to put a boot on it, really, because it's so easy for that tap to be turned off. Except that, of course, then the state schools wouldn't be able to take all of the kids that would. I don't think Catholic staff would go on strike against. I don't think the bishops could summon up the Catholic Education Office staff to go on strike about anything, unless it were a cut in funding. They would strike for that, but they would not strike for any moral issues like, they want us to teach this program in the schools and it's anti-Catholic or whatever. It's not consistent with Catholic theology. We can't do that. They would never go out on strike for that, but they would if they were going to lose their funding. My concern is, and I've said this before, is that the Catholic education system is the great employer of the nation's brothers-in-law. So everyone in Catholic Australia has a relative who's probably working in the Catholic education system, either at first or second degree. There will be someone in your extended family or in your network of friends who is working for Catholic education. And those are the people you need to be scared of, because if the belly goes up and the money stops, those people may or may not be out of a job. The thing is, though, I've said in the book, if we sold the whole thing, we could actually transfer the staff over as well, because you need the staff who are familiar with the system as it runs to be in place to run it. And probably a state government that was purchasing all of this could potentially take those people on. So there wouldn't be as many job losses as people think. It's just we'd be moving the whole problem off our patch and into the state government's patch. And that to me is the great advantage of it. But so that the bishops wouldn't like that, when the people who work in the diocesan bureaucracy, all of who have brothers-in-law working in Catholic education, come to the bishop complaining, he's not going to want to hear that. So that's going to make him very risk averse in this area as well.
Have you given any thought to, okay, you sell all the schools, what do you put all that money towards? Because you're talking hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, probably billions.
Fantastic. We can actually start paying for stuff ourselves instead of relying on taxpayers' money for it, because a lot of Catholic charities are floating along on a really nice cushion of taxpayer funding at the moment. Catholic healthcare, absolutely, but I think healthcare will go the same way. I think that will gradually become more and more. I mean, it's currently largely propped up by taxpayers' money. There's more private income in the healthcare system than there is in the education system, but overall, if the government withdrew its funding, that the Catholic healthcare system would also collapse. So that I think will go down a different path. But our charities, absolutely, we could start paying for some of that stuff ourselves. We could also set up the smaller Catholic education system. The little schools in the right places, in the outer suburbs where the single income families with more than 2 children tend to live. And that's what we do there. And we could staff them, and we could pay those staff generously if we had a big kitty of money that could be, prudently invested. That means that you're going to be able to sustain your smaller, more authentic Catholic system over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I can think of a bunch of projects that could do with some seed funding or some ongoing funding that would deliver
Absolutely.
far more in terms of
Yes.
Catholic outcomes than
Yeah.
what we're getting the big ticket stuff we have at the moment.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I guess while we're on the charities and whatnot, you've said you'd like to close almost all secondhand clothing shops. Uh,
Oh,
I've been a fan of Vinnie's, but I've
I
also been a
know.
critic of it because I've seen them raise their prices over time
Yes,
and
that too.
almost become,
Mm,
how come these guys aren't being taxed because they're
yeah. Yeah.
$80 for something?
Yeah.
Anyway, but you've got your own view. So what are your thoughts on these?
Oh, look, it breaks my heart because I'm like you. I've, gone to the various boutiques, for many, many years and clothed myself very happily in them. But it was when I realized that charity shops were only selling about 17% of what is donated to them. And having worked in charity shops, I've volunteered in them as well, so I know what goes on in the back room. And I know that people give you dreadful stuff that's rubbish, and you've literally got to just throw it away. And in some cases, you can sort it. So some of it can go for ragging, which is great. You can turn it into dish rags and, cleaning cloths and things like that. And you can do that on an industrial scale. But some of it you can't, and that gets shipped to developing countries. And there are mountains of this stuff in some of those countries. And it's burning on fire. There's plastic fumes going up. The poor people are picking over it, looking for this, that, and the other. It is disgusting. But it's not the secondhand shop's fault. That's the fast fashion kind of mentality that we've all bought into, that we love so much, and guilty as charged. I've done it as well. But I think the shops, that they sell so little. I think if you're going to do the shops, you need to do them in a slightly different way. So, maybe have more free events, maybe give more clothing away. That would be good. You're not going to make money from that, of course. I don't know. At the moment, it's not. I mean, people think they're in the circular economy when they buy their stuff from a secondhand shop, and in a sense they are, but most of it is like this one-way journey to somewhere bad. And, people get mad at me and they say I don't like Pope Francis and Laudato Si, and Laudato Si says we should do this, that, and the other, and, sort our recyclables and stuff. And that's all very well and groovy. But we have Catholic charity shops that are not participating in that process, and they're actually possibly making it worse. So I think it's good to think about this stuff and think, I think free clothing swaps are great. I went to that one and I've never recovered from it. It was the most lovely experience that I'd had in years. And I thought, this is actually the way forward. This is what we should be doing. But also, if you're going to donate to a charity shop, let me just say this. If you wouldn't offer the stuff to your best friend, don't give it to a charity shop. Don't give them your rubbish. Put it in the bin yourself.
Because I wonder what their disposal costs are. They must be massive. And so a lot of the money that's actually they're making in their ticket items are going to dispose of a lot of the stuff they have to get rid of. So
warehousing and things like that. It's all expensive. I wish we incinerated stuff. They do that in Switzerland. They use it to generate electricity. It's probably really expensive to set up, but wow. Think of all the waste you could get rid of. You just incinerate all this stuff from secondhand shops. It'd be amazing.
The other thing my other quibble with places like Vinnie's is when you look at their DVD collections and you see that they don't purge out the mature, like, adult rated material, and it's more or less accessible on the shelves for the kids who are browsing. What's this movie? And they're selling it, and I object to them selling material which is morally problematic.
Yes, and all those dirty books, the 50 Shades of Grey, stuff like that.
3 copies on the shelf, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's because most of the people who volunteer in these shops are not Catholics.
Yeah.
So, and that's something people
issue.
also forget. They also forget. So again, you're thinking about the Catholic identity. There's more to Catholic identity than a little statue of St. Vincent de Paul tucked up behind the counter. And maybe that's something we could think about. Look, we had a problem here in Fremantle with the local Vinnies. They had a pride display in the window, even though I think Vinnie's central command has said you are not to do this. Somehow it had happened in the shop, and that had to be brought to central command's attention, and I think something was done about it. But yeah, there's a lot happening there. And yet Vinnies are one of the better ones who actually generate a lot of their own income. They don't get by on humongous amounts of taxpayers' money. Some Catholic charities do. It's almost like 98%. It's incredible.
I heard you mention Catholic identity, and a lot of the big Catholic Inc. now
Yeah, yeah.
on very generous wages employ
Mm,
Catholic identity officers and whatnot.
yeah.
I know you'd have to have an opinion on them, so please share.
I have an opinion on everything. That's the problem. Um, yeah, look, mission and identity, or identity and mission. And I laughed when somebody first told me that we had these things, because I didn't realize we had these things. But a friend of mine actually got a job as an identity and mission staffer. Yes, on a generous salary. And it's like, what on earth do you do? And she told me what she did, and it's like, but don't they already do that? Isn't that the whole point of having a Catholic organisation, that you actually all know what your mission is and what your identity is? But apparently they don't. So they bring these people in to, I don't know. I don't know. What
Consult.
do? They run workshops, like how to be a Catholic, how to have a Catholic identity. And this is something that we found very clearly in the Catholics in Australia survey. Catholic identity costs you nothing. And it's really easy to assume, but because of that, it's actually meaningless as a measure. In any survey that you do, you can ask people, do you identify as a Catholic? And they'll say, yeah. And, they don't believe anything. They don't believe any of it, but they'll identify as a Catholic. It's a meaningless measure. The real measure that you need to ask people is, how often do they go to Mass? That will tell you something about the person. So, yeah, identity and mission. Whose idea was that? Gosh.
It seems like a desperate measure to me, because it's like, you've got,
Yeah.
this is the appointed Catholic to tell you how it
Yes.
is to be Catholic, but you can't change
Yes.
an institutional culture like that. You're going to come up against a whole lot of headwinds. So
That's right. And look, they can make all the recommendations they want, and the organisation can sign up and say, yes, in 3 years' time, we'll have met all these recommendations. And they won't. And the whole thing will just sink like a stone.
And the thing is, you can't come in with a full-throated Catholicism either, because everyone will get their back up straight away. And so by
Yes.
the time your modest proposals are considered, it's only window dressing. It's not the real
Yes.
deal. So
Yes. And what's happened to you in the meantime? Have you lost your faith, in the face of this awfulness? Or have you decided to succumb and become part of the Borg yourself? You get absorbed and only an arm and a leg still move, because actually you've decided you like the big salary, and you can continue to be the identity and mission person and pay your mortgage. Just go along.
yeah,
It's the other
I think
scary
it's
thing.
very easy to get trapped into that a comfortable living, but also a unconscious conforming of one's mind to the bureaucracy or whatever
Yeah.
it is that you're with.
Yeah, you assimilate. You assimilate to the Borg.
And it's only when you're out of it you go, oh, wait a minute, I was in the Matrix for a while. Yeah. So changing now to children's liturgies, which you talk about. You're critical of them. I've been critical of them. My dad was very strongly critical of them. We were never allowed to go to them when I was growing up. What are your
Yeah.
problems with them?
Look, well, I'm not talking about children's masses, which I also think are execrable, by the way, because it's so wince-inducing. The children's liturgy during Mass, when they take the kids out,
Yeah.
and then they will come back in with a picture of a donkey that they've coloured in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that. What the hell is that all about? Really, like you, I was never allowed to do it. So it's like I was never allowed to be part of a youth group either, because my mother was convinced I would become pregnant. And she was probably right, because quite a lot of people did. But that aside, children's liturgy, what is its point? I don't understand what it's for. If it's to get the kids out of the parents' hair, I understand that, but it's like, actually, parents, you need to have your kids in Mass with you. You need to be teaching them how to behave. And yes, it's going to take years, and we all get it. And your kid's going through a horrible stage, and we're all very sympathetic. That parents should have their kids with them in Mass. They should be teaching the kid what's going on. What do? I don't know. They go off to a room. I'm assuming someone reads them a story or something, and they colour in a picture. And they come back in with this picture. And some of these kids are big.
Well, yeah, like you're 12 years old and you're doing what the 6-year-old is doing, and you connect the dots eventually, surely, and go, well, hang on, I'm outgrowing this,
Like, what is the point? Look, no one is growing up to go to Mass in Australia, so what is the point of children's liturgy? What is it meant to achieve? What is its telos? What is the point. No one can explain this to me, Mark, and no one's ever been able to tell me really what it's for. So it's like, why are we doing this to ourselves? Why are we doing it to the kids? Why don't we make them sit in Mass and follow what's going on? And who knows, that might actually be slightly more interesting and slightly better for them.
So, it's occurred to me that with these children's liturgies, they take them out because they assume they'll get bored or can't pay attention in Mass. And that may or may not be true. But as someone who goes to the Latin Mass with all the smells and bells, I found my kids, at least if they can see things, are never too distracted because they've always got something. The auditory, the visual, the nasal. What's this?
Yes,
what do you call
olfactory.
it? Yeah, olfactory. That's the term for it. They're all engaged, and so I've never really had an issue. I mean, you always have here and there some difficulties, but perhaps bringing back some of those smells and bells might actually help, and you won't need your children's liturgies. What do you think of that?
Well, that's buying into that dangerous line of argument that people used in the 70s and 80s about like clown masses and guitars and balloons and that kind of stuff. So you want to be very careful about the masses entertainment. It's very dangerous. You're on thin ice there. No, seriously, once the kids pass the screaming stage, families should sit up the front. Because, it's really good. The more, unfortunately, of course, if all families sit up the front, that's a lot of naughty kids distracting each other, and that can be just as bad. But if you can find somewhere to sit in the church where the kids have a clear view, and if you explain to them what's going on in Mass outside of Mass, so the family that talks about religion during the week, did you see what happened on Sunday at Mass? Did you see how that, and then did you see what Father did? Well, what that means is this. Okay, so next time you're there, you keep a close eye and you see if he does it again. This kind of stuff, you can actually help your children to understand the liturgy if you talk about it outside of Mass. And this is where most parents go wrong. It's like the week is a blur, and then suddenly it's Sunday morning and they're in the church and the kid is screaming, and it's like, give them the iPhone, send them to the children's liturgy, do whatever it takes to shut this kid up because I've had enough. So it's a lot to do with parenting and a lot to do with the parenting level of commitment to forming your children as Catholics, and not expecting 20 minutes or 10 minutes of children's liturgy every Sunday to make the slightest bit of difference to your child. But don't treat the Mass as entertainment. It's deadly serious, good stuff.
Your suggestion that parents take the kids up the front is a good one. It can be quite intimidating, actually, because it's a big humiliation if you have to walk past everyone on your way out.
Yes.
It's a troublesome child.
Oh, look, the parental walk of shame. Look, we've all been there. The kid under your arm like a pig. We've I've done it. Everyone's done it.
But I think it does pay off. I think if the children can see what's going on, then they're much less likely to start hitting their brother or something like that.
Yes. Yes.
So there
Indeed.
You go. So you quoted before Buckminster Fuller, or a quote attributed to him, which is that in order to change an existing paradigm, you do not struggle to try and change the problematic model. You create a new model and make the old one obsolete. So in what way do you see Catholics creating a new paradigm without creating a new church?
I think the first and most obvious place they've done it is in their educational choices for their children. That so many Mass-going Catholics have just chosen away from the Catholic origin education system, and they've come up with their own solutions. So they've founded independent schools in some cases, not many because it's really expensive and it's very hard work. Homeschooling. And this is something where I think if there is a future Catholic education system, it needs to work alongside and with the homeschooling movement, not against it, not as competition, because there are parents who drop their kids in and out of homeschooling as the child needs or as the family size changes and what have you. Some children might do a year at school and then they might do a year of homeschooling. So the two systems need to work alongside each other. And I think that's something some Catholic schools have certainly, and I mean authentically Catholic schools, the very few are appreciating that, and they're doing it already. The prayer groups. Gosh, adoration, Mark. Adoration has absolutely revived in Australia, and that's happened since the 90s. Adoration went completely out of style. Like no one was doing it, and then suddenly they were. And that has just spread, and people have, because they're willing to do the time in adoration, the priest will support it. The priest will leave the church open. They'll get an adoration chapel built. So that stuff has come from lay people, who really wanted to take part in those devotions. And they've built that. They've built, and no diocese that I can think of has shut that down. Because I think even, the most liberal diocese you might like to think of in Australia realises that people in front of the Blessed Sacrament, that's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. It's a really good thing. They would be the really obvious examples that I can think of. There's probably lots of others. I think there are more to come.
Yeah.
I think there will be more to come in the future church between now and, maybe 2050. They'll moving the intentional communities, moving out of, the expensive suburbs and going out to that periphery where you can get the bigger land and you can have the more kids and you can have someone at home, or you can be sharing jobs and things like that, forming those networks. That I think is a wonderful thing, because that's actually how the church is going to survive in Australia in terms of mass going.
That's one thing I think that that perhaps the bishops haven't realised yet is that the bigger Catholic families cannot afford the city or the suburbs. My situation is that, and I'd love a mass that I wanted to go to close by, out west where it's cheaper. And that I'm sure if they planted a mass there, you would have a lot of people who would move there.
Yes.
And you can see that there are different enclaves and stuff forming around the country. But if bishops started planting some nice masses around the place, they got a reputation as something that you wanted to bring your children up in or with, they would see growth in those areas. Rather than in these, because you mentioned there's so many parishes in the cities which are dwindling, and they're all clustered together, and they will need to have some of those churches shuttered. So rather than just shutter all the churches, how about sell a couple off, or I don't know what you do with them, and then build out west or north or south.
It's really hard to get the Catholic Church to sell property. They are so averse to selling anything. And that's why when I mentioned selling the Catholic school system, people just laugh, because it's like, in your dreams. And maybe it is, and it probably is really hard to get the church to close a parish church. It's hard to close a parish, hard to close a church, and really hard to sell it. It's very bad optics. But the thing is that we've been playing the optics game for too long, and now we're in a situation where we're actually going to need to do this kind of stuff to survive. Can I ask you what you mean by a nice mass?
Well, I'm not an exclusive Latin masser. I switch between both, and so I'll go to a nice country church where it's kind of low key for the Novus Ordo, but generally speaking, my Sunday is a 40-minute drive, and that's where I find all the other families that my children can mingle with. And if I was to go to my local parish, they've got some young children, but I just can't bear the mass. I can't bear it.
Yes.
And so it's that mixture of having a demographic that aligns with your own, and also having a place where you feel like you're nourished. And they're really, as you know, they can be hard to come by. And so if those two things can be provided, then I'll go.
Why can't you bear the mass in the one that you go to that's with the kids? What's unbearable
because
about it?
Because it's a social club where where it's, you chat before mass, you chat after mass. The priest gets all chatty, and he's not there to say the mass necessarily. He's there to see how your week was, and I just don't like that kind of chumminess. For me, we're worshiping God. We're not there to pat each other on the back, and I just. I mentioned Smells and Bells, but I find the music mediocre. It stays very dated, whereas I think Gregorian is more timeless.
Yes, and it's what was recommended by Vatican II, apart from anything else. The bishop point is a good one. I wish bishops did visitations of parishes, because then they would get out to the peripheries and they'd meet your communities. And they'd realise, wow, there's actually a whole ton of young families out here. Why did no one tell me? Because no one's going to tell him. No one in the inner city even knows you exist either. No one's going to tell the bishop about that, or the auxiliary bishop, or if you've got a good auxiliary bishop, sometimes that's how you can establish a relationship with the episcopate. And this is like the chasm There's such a chasm between the episcopate and the laity in Australia now. Maybe there always has been, but we've lost that trust. And that relationship has been so badly damaged. I think it's as bad as the clergy abuse crisis in terms of the loss of trust of the episcopate, because we've seen them be not interested in the laity, and not care about young families, and not make it easy, for people who are trying to do the right thing. And I think that is something that absolutely must change in the church in the next 25 years, or we really are going to struggle to have a future if we can't rebuild trust with our bishops. But the bishops have to kind of meet us halfway on that one.
Yeah, I feel for the bishops because I feel for them, and I'm not hugely empathetic to them, but or sympathetic. But they do seem to be administrators. I saw during COVID that was happening. Yeah. I just see, generally speaking, there's a health system and an education system, and it's more like that they're the head of a I don't know, incorporated entity, whatever you call it, rather than a pastor.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned that the priests, they don't feel any kind of particular love for their bishop, perhaps because for the same reasons. And I think that model is wrong. There's something wrong with that. That charity is not there. I don't find charity. I mean, if you've worked within or around the carapace, they're all about processes and system, lawyers and accountants.
Yes.
And very little about concern for your eternal soul. And anyway, that's my whinge.
No, it's true, and so many ordinary lay Catholics do feel this, and they've felt it for a long time. People have suggested different solutions, and one of them is the smaller diocese, which is funny because part of me wants to merge dioceses in Australia because it's insane. At the moment, we've got tiny little ones and we've got these huge ones, and it seems to be very strange. But actually, there is an argument to be made for smaller dioceses so that the bishop is closer to a smaller group of people. And so you have a more direct relationship with your bishop. I think that potentially could be quite an exciting way forward. I always think I love Archbishop Porteous in Tasmania. He is a wonderful man. And that is the tiniest archdiocese, I think, in the whole world. It's so small, and there's hardly any Mass-going Catholics there either. But he is in a position to know his flock very, very well. And I think that there's something lovely about that, and to know what's going on. Because the place is so small, he can actually know what's going on. And maybe that would get them out of the 3 locked doors and the scary secretary, with the bishop cowering in this inner sanctum. Yeah.
Very good. All right, Philippa, we've been chatting for about an hour. So that's usually where we go to. So quick, another plug for your book, Witness the Future Catholic Church in Australia.
Yes, available from all good Catholic bookstores. Find them if you dare. Definitely available from Fidelity Books and Pieties and things in Melbourne. I will be there on the 22nd of March at 2 p.m. in the afternoon or thereabouts to sign books. If you'd like to bring a book down and come and say hello, please let the shop know you're coming, because we've got afternoon tea, so there has to be an RSVP for that. The book is going to be launched in Perth on the 8th of April with Professor Tracy Rowland. Will be launching the book, and then there'll be a Sydney launch on Sunday the 13th of April, which I believe is Palm Sunday. Very auspicious. And Professor Jim Franklin will be launching the book there at Lee Books. So if you want any information, send me an email, send Mark an email, he'll send me an email if you're interested in any of this. Thank you so much for having me, Mark. This has been very interesting.
Thank you, Philippa. I'll put some links in the description. For those who are watching, if you've enjoyed Philippa and our discussion, please like, share and subscribe to our channel so that we can get more people like her on. Philippa Martyr from Perth in Western Australia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks.